We have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Nik Hayes, whose talk this evening is entitled UFOs, the Hidden Reality. Now, Nick's a UK-based author and photographer who had a low-altitude encounter with a strange pulsating UFO on Christmas Day evening in 2008. Now, that provided him with many questions and probably very few answers, and it resulted in spending the last 12 years photographing and filming invisible biological UFOs, craft-like objects, and other strange phenomena. Now, it's said the human eye only sees about 2.5% of the electromagnetic spectrum, and Nick's photographs have been captured in both infrared and ultraviolet parts of that spectrum. In August 2016, Nick's first book, Quest for the Invisibles, was published by the Book Tree, San Diego in California. And this documents the first 5 years of his photographic work captured at his research centre in Oxford. And he's come from Oxford today, so he's come a fair way to talk to you. He still continues with his work, as well as making appearances on various internet shows and at UFO and Paranormal conferences. Tonight he's going to discuss the early pioneering work of UFO photographer Trevor James Constable and the later work of Luciano Boccone and his Italian UFO research group, the GRCU. They were active in the early 1980s. He's then going to go into depth about his work in both the infrared and ultraviolet parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, including the attraction, detection and photographic techniques he uses to capture biological UFOs and other invisible phenomena. Hopefully he'll show you dozens of images that he's captured in that sort of medium. Now, the majority of the things he's captured appear to be biological in nature, rather than actual nuts and bolts crafts, although he has captured a few actual craft-like objects as well. So, enough from me, so please put your hands together for Mr. Nik Hayes. Thank you.
Yeah, you can do the lights. Okay, hi everybody and thanks for coming. Okay, so my talk tonight is UFOs, the Hidden Reality. So we're going to be taking a look at UFOs which can't be seen with the naked eye, or predominantly can't be seen, because these objects do come into the visible spectrum now and then. A lot of these things that we're going to be talking about are actually biological in nature, actual living entities existing in a plasma-like state in the infrared and the ultraviolet parts of the spectrum. And the actual evidence for these types of objects goes right back to 1957 with the work of Trevor James Constable in the Mojave Desert of Southern California. Constable captured the first known images of invisible biological UFOs using a standard 35mm camera loaded with infrared film. Some more evidence was gained in the early 1980s by Italian UFO researcher Luciano Boccone and his GRCU group. So I'm going to be taking you through some of Constable's work tonight and some of the GRCU work, and then we're going to be going on to the work that I've done with Quest for the Invisibles, the project I started in 2010 to capture my own evidence of these types of objects. Okay, so I've always had a belief in UFOs, and growing up in the 70s and 80s, I've always watched a lot of the films, a lot of the, things like Star Trek and, a lot of the stuff that was on telly in those days. I've always had a strong belief in UFOs and didn't see any reason to believe why things shouldn't come from other planets. How I got into this type of photography was, I was going to take you right back to the beginning of Quest for the Invisibles, the project that I set up in 2010. But it really begins on Christmas Day evening 2008. Whilst walking one of my dogs, Alfie, on a freezing cold night near Oxford, well just around Oxford where I live, I had an encounter with a UFO which suddenly appeared in amongst the fog. It was about 200 foot in the air and about 200 feet away at the time, and could barely see it because it was really thick fog. But it was particularly windy this night as well, and every now and then there was like a thinner band of fog, so I actually got to see this thing in its entirety. And can you do the first slide please, and I'll show you. I managed to capture one image of it. So this is the object. It was a very, very bright object. It actually appeared sort of pink to orange, but the camera wasn't a very good camera, so it's come out white. But I've done an embossed version of the object on the right to give you an idea of the kind of thing, how it looked. Now the object was only travelling at sort of 2 to 3 miles an hour, and I managed to follow it for about half a mile, right out into a sort of really remote area near a park. And although it seemed like a craft, and you know, I'd only ever thought that UFOs could be craft, but this thing seemed to be breathing, and it was pulsating with colour, and it reminded me more of something from the deep ocean, you know, a bioluminescent life form from the deep ocean, rather than the type of craft. And this sort of gave me more sort of questions than answers, to be quite honest with you. So I set about trying to find out, you know, what this kind of thing could be. I'd never heard of the biological UFO in those days, and I didn't know how to sort of search it online. Now, a couple of months into my research, I came across a guy called Trevor James Constable, who had actually captured visible biological UFOs, living UFOs, in the 1950s, well in 1957 actually, in the Mojave Desert of Southern California. And Constable had gone there. Can I have the next slide please? So what happened was, I found out about Constable's work. I ended up buying his book, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, and his earlier, which came out in 1976, and that's the 2008 reissue. And then I bought his earlier book, the 1958 book, They Live in the Sky. And I was really blown away by the fact that he'd captured these things in the infrared. And so I wrote off to Constable, and he wrote back to me. He was in his 70s at this time, and he encouraged me to go forward. And I said, rather than using infrared film, I said I wanted to use digital. And he encouraged me to go forward and start my work. So this is pretty much what I did. So in 2010, I got my first infrared camera, and I began going out with the infrared camera and just seeing what I could capture. And I'd later go on to build a cloudbuster, which is a detection device, which we'll go into a bit later. And I really started my work from there. Can I have the next slide, please? So Constable had become interested in UFOs in the 1950s through the many books that were around at the time, and particularly the books of Major Donald Keyhoe. And one particular incident was the Nansai Shoto incident, which happened near Okinawa, Japan. And it's considered by many to be the biggest wartime UFO detection by radar. And it happened in the Pacific theatre of World War II. It started off with 200 to 300 moving objects detected by the radars of 2 aircraft carriers. The speed was approximately 700 miles per hour and the altitude 12,000 feet. And as they got nearer to the 2 aircraft carriers, they split into 2 columns as if they were going to attack. So they sent 12 intercepting aircraft up. And although it was a really bright day, clear vision, they never saw anything. So Constable became very interested in the fact that these UFOs could be picked up on radar but couldn't be seen with the naked eye. And he was also very interested in cases where UFOs had appeared and disappeared whilst under observation. So he decided to start looking in the infrared. Go on, next slide please. So realising that radar operates in the microwave spectrum, it's just gone off. Which borders the infrared. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
So realising that radar borders the microwave spectrum, was in the microwave spectrum, which borders the infrared, Constable decided to start in the infrared, looking for, see if he could find where these UFOs were disappearing to. So he began using a 35mm camera loaded with Kodak high-speed infrared film. So, next one, please. So in the summer of 1957, Constable and fellow researcher Dr. James Wood began travelling to a remote area in the Mojave Desert near Yucca Valley in Old Woman Springs. And they would drive overnight on a Friday evening and set up their equipment ready to begin their work at first light. Next slide, please. Now the main problems they faced were how they would attract potential UFOs to their location, and then once they'd attracted them, how they did then detect their presence with them being invisible in order to photograph them. Next slide, please. So Franklin Thomas, who was an accomplished occultist and friend of Dr. James Woods and Trevor James Constable, suggested the star exercise. He suggested cyclical repetitions of the star exercise, which is an esoteric procedure by which the whole body's life force can be strongly energised. And it involves putting your body into a star shape and oscillating your body across the north, south and east-west magnetic lines of the Earth. So typically Constable would face east in the quadrant to which the sun was rising at the time. So he would basically face east and oscillate his body across the north-south lines. and then he would turn west and oscillate himself again across the north-south lines. Then he would turn 270 degrees to north, and then he would oscillate himself across the east to west lines, and then he would face south and again oscillate himself across the east to west lines. He would then turn all the way back round again and face east and begin the whole process again. And he would do up to 100 repetitions, acting basically as a bioenergetic power sort of point, really, a power station, putting out the how can I describe it? The pulsations, because when you do this exercise, you send a regular pattern of bioenergetic pulsations into the ether. And it was thought that these would attract the UFOs. So repeat up to 100 times, and he had a camera on him, and James Woods was going to be the main photographer. The constable also had a camera on him in case he should see anything. So they went back to the same point, same place for up to a couple of months, and they never caught anything at all. But all that was about to change. It was on the 25th of August, whilst having breakfast, Constable suddenly became aware of a pulsation above him, and springing up from his position, and he suddenly became aware of a pulsation above him. Using the technique for relaxing the eyes and seeing the invisible, he managed to detect what he describes, can I have the next slide please, a shimmering variation to the otherwise smooth blue sky background. And although he couldn't see anything at all, he suspected it was a craft, and he was picking up on the power of this craft. So he basically took the first photograph of the object as it was above his position, and then he took another 5 photographs as the object moved from above his position and off above the desert terrain. Next photograph, please. So this is the first, the fourth and the sixth photograph taken from the series of 6. So the first photograph was taken as it was right above his position, and then by the fourth photograph it had moved across, allowing him to frame bits of the desert terrain in the photograph. And in the sixth photograph there's another object, the lower of the two, which seemed quite similar to the original object he was recording, he was taking photos of. Next one please. So this is the first one, and you can see obvious eyes, and there's markings on it as well, which are quite reminiscent of an amoeba. There's vacuole-like markings, and there's obvious eyes on this one. So this was taken immediately above his position, and it was the very first photograph. And when he got the photographs back, he was very shocked, because he expected to have a photograph of a craft, but instead he found himself with some giant amoeba-like object. Next photo, please. And again, in this this fourth photograph, you can see the object seems to have swollen. The 2 eye-like features are still there, but the vacuoles and other markings have become a lot fainter as the object has expanded. Next one, please. And here we see like the 6th and final objects. The original amoeba-like object is right at the top, and you can just see the eye. And underneath you have a similar object with 2 eyes. So this caused quite a shock to him, because he obviously thought he was going to get the photograph of a craft, and he just didn't know what he was capturing. He'd never heard of anything like this before. It was quite a shock to him. So I'm just going to get a quick drink of that. Get on the next one, please. So they continued on with their work, and this is another early photograph. This was actually taken by Dr. James Woods. It was one of nearly a dozen photographs taken by the pair. It shows a load of spherical UFOs in the Mojave Desert coming around Constable. Woods took this photograph of Constable while Constable was trying to detect these things in the invisible. And they both took about 6 photographs of the same happening. And in some of the photographs there was a couple of dozen of these objects all around them. Although they couldn't see them at all, they managed to capture them using the infrared film. And these are pretty typical of some of the objects that Constable captured. They seemed to sort of come in a swarm. They would dance around his position. And these kind of objects, when you catch them in the visible spectrum, they can often appear as if they're made of liquid metal. A lot of them look like they're made of liquid mercury. In the infrared, with a digital camera, they appear white, because they're reflecting infrared light, but in the visible spectrum, if you see them or photograph them, they'll often appear silver. Next slide, please. So he continued on with his work, away from the sort of main desert area. This one on the left was taken at Giant Rock, which at one time was the largest freestanding boulder in the world, I believe, until it split in half. This is another object he caught. He caught quite a few of these kind of ovoid objects, and a lot of them were very, very dark, and there seemed to be no kind of reaction going on with the film emulsions. So they seem to be like an absorptive body, as in this case, although the middle bit seems like an area of high reflection rather than being an actual hole through the middle bit. But it goes on to capture an awful lot of these types of ovoid UFOs, as well as the spherical ones as well. Next slide, please. Here's another example caught above the Los Angeles Industrial Business District in the mid-1960s. There's a smaller one underneath it. Under closer observation, these vacuole-like markings can also be seen on this object as well. On the right-hand side, you've got another object captured by Dr. James Woods, which has an almost like jellyfish feel. And again, under closer inspection, you can again see these markers, which are typical of amoeba and something from the microscopical world. And this has actually got some kind of a ridge on the dome shape. It's got like an indent in it as well. And he found that these objects were often appearing above power lines and telephone lines. And they took quite a few photographs of these types of phenomena near power lines. Next one, please. Mount Wilson was quite a popular place for him to take photographs. And this is one of several photographs taken of this plasmatic fauna. Now these objects, they sort of pulsate, change size, move their position, appear and disappear in a fraction of a second. And he captured a lot of these types of things moving through the skies. And this was like taken in 1959, and it's not far from the famous Mount Wilson Observatory, which he spent a lot of time around taking photographs. And some objects pretty similar to the top two here were actually captured by the Spanish Air Force on several occasions. They look very, very similar to these objects. They were actually photographed by one of the pilots, I believe, and they appeared in one of the local papers at the time. Next slide, please. So eventually, Constable stopped using the star exercise, and he got into the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich. Now, Reich had discovered orbital energy in the 1940s, also known as chi or prana. It's basically just life force. And Dr. Wilhelm Reich had found that by building a cloudbuster and using metal pipes grounded in water and elevated to be able to point into any direction or angle, he found that he can actually manipulate the weather. He could hold back weather fronts and create rain, and this is something that he did successfully, bringing rain to drought-stricken areas. There's something carried on by a guy called DeMeo as well, James DeMeo. He was out in the Great Lakes of Africa using cloudbusters. So Constable continued on with this for a long time using the cloudbuster, for another 10 years, and he found he was capturing the basic types of UFOs that he caught by using the star exercise. So he'd carry on with this work until about 1975, then he eventually finished with his UFO work and started getting into weather modification. Next one, please. But here's a typical photograph. You can see the cloudbuster pipes on the right-hand side. Now, they're actually called draw pipes. What they do is they shoot with like a beam of energy at the cloud, and they basically draw the energy back down into the tubes, and it unsticks the clouds, which is why it dissipates clouds. It's called a cloudbuster. And I've successfully used my cloudbuster to dissipate clouds and to do other types of things as well. This was actually taken by his 12-year-old daughter Diana at the time, and was probably one of the best photographs he's got of a biological UFO coming in towards the cloudbuster pipes. So Constable basically retired in 1975 from his UFO work, and he carried right on through to the late 1980s with his weather modification, and he even set up a company in Singapore, and he was using it to create rain and to hold back fog, to dissipate fog in Singapore. Okay, next slide, please. So it's through the work of Trevor James Constable that I found out about Luciano Boccone, who was an Italian UFO researcher. Now, Boccone and his group, the GRCU, they were one of 3 Italian groups at the time. Back in sort of about 1976 they began their work. And they were one of 3 groups that were actually looking into the infrared part of the electromagnetic spectrum in order to try and capture UFOs. And they were one of the first groups to actually capture something direct from the invisible state. Next one, please. So the GRCU, there's 25 members. They were based in Arizona, Italy. So there's 25 members in the group, and they used a whole range of different electronic devices, such as Geiger radiation counters, precision magnetic compasses, instantaneous temperature indicators, ultrasound detectors, ultraviolet detectors, and basic light detectors. And what they were looking for was quick variations in radioactivity, luminosity, magnetic field or air temperature, and photographs would be immediately taken in the direction to which these variations were detected. And this led to them capturing a lot of really, really great things over the years. Now, the GRCU carried on their work to the mid-1980s, and they all seemed to disappear, and Luciano Boccone died, I think it was in 1980. And the massive archive of work that these guys did just disappeared. I've been trying really hard to find people who knew them and get a hold of some of their work, but it's very, very hard. Now, Luciano Boccone released a lot of his footage that he captured, his photographs, in a book called UFO, la realtà nascosta, which is UFO, the hidden reality, which was available in Italian only. Now, there's only about 1,000 of these books made, but it had nearly 200 photographs in, and I actually bought myself a copy back in 2011. I found it on the internet. It was quite expensive at the time. I paid £350 for it because I just had to have a copy of it. So it's very, very rare. I don't think it's ever going to be released, and so I basically spent years trying to get hold of some of the photographs from it so that I can actually share them with people. So if you could go on to the next one, please, if you could. Okay, so the GRCU did a lot of their early work in the daytime, and this is a good early example captured using a Geiger radiation counter, and it was taken by one of the GRCU group as they're on holiday in Bangkok. It shows an object very, very similar to some of the things that Trevor James Constable captured. It almost looks like a blimp or an air balloon. But they found that they captured a lot of these things. Some of them were in groups, some of them were travelling by themselves. And some photographs they took, there was like 4 or 5 of these things just moving across the sky. This is probably the clearest footage of everything they caught in the daytime, because a lot of them were very translucent and almost see-through, and they don't show very well because of the nature of them being reflected, infrared light. And this was actually taken using colour infrared film, which is why you see the sort of, there should be yellow, I'm not sure if you can see the yellow around the outside, but it's like a blacky brown colour, then red with a yellow around the outside. So this is one of my favourite ones actually. But the GRCU were sort of known really for their nighttime work, which is where they really came into their own. Next slide, please. So again, this was taken by one of the GRCU cameramen above the huge steelworks at Italside in Genoa, Carigliano, Italy, back in 1977. This is one of several photographs taken at the time, and again, the photographer used a Geiger radiation counter to detect these things. And if you go to the next one, there's a bit of a zoom in on them. You can just, you can see the shapes a lot clearer. There's also a couple of snake-like objects in the sky. On the far left, just underneath those two, you can see what looks like a snake-like object, and there's about 3 of them actually in this photograph, although they're not that clear. But they did see these things in the visible sometimes, but 99% of the time they were filming directly from the invisible using a Geiger counter, and also magnetic compasses, because they often found that they get rises in heat and they get differentials in the magnetic compass, and they also get hits on the Geiger counter. So this phenomena, as it was coming into this reality, albeit invisibly, it would cause a reaction which sometimes would make the Geiger counter read 3 or 4 times, if not more, higher than the normal background radiation levels. And at the very same time, they'd get magnetic deviations of anything up to 10 degrees. They'd also get like hits on other equipment, so they get like a raising in heat, or sometimes it would go cold. So, go on to the next one, please. Here's another one taken from above the steel plant. As you can see, I've enlarged a couple of these at the beginning. They look very UFO-like, very craft-like, some of these things, and when seen in the visible spectrum, it's easy to see why a lot of these things do actually look like craft. I think this was a 40-second time-lapse photograph, this one. They like to do time-lapse photographs or really long exposures. This is where they captured a lot of their really good stuff from. And as you can see, the various shapes of some of these things, they cover a whole sort of spectrum of different shapes, from like little dots to kind of craft-like looking things, and almost like snake-like looking, worm-like looking things as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so this photograph was taken by a whole group of them. I think they took about 30 photographs of this when it happened. There's 25 members in the group, and they took scores and scores of photographs of these plasmatic-looking objects. which were actually captured on colour infrared film. The objects were actually yellow with like these blue spots on them. But they actually captured loads and loads of photographs of these things coming down from above the trees and actually coming down to ground level and bouncing around on the floor and moving through the researchers' cars and equipment. Dozens and dozens of photographs are taken of this, and there's some I'd really like to get my hands on. But I can't seem to track down any of the group at all. I've tried various means and I've reached out to quite a few people, but the massive archive of stuff that they captured seems to be lost to the world. So that's one of the reasons why I've decided to, try and show some of the GRCU footage to people, just to try and show them some of the things that, have been being captured by the group, because they're virtually unknown. I mean, I'd never heard of the GRCU. And to be quite honest with you, I've never even heard of Trevor James Constable. All the years I've been looking into UFOs, never heard of his name. And he was pretty much shunned, Trevor James Constable, as were these guys, by a lot of the UFO organisations who were pretty fixed on the idea that all UFOs were, nuts and bolts, ships from other planets, basically. So Constable in particular was banned from many of the UFO conventions and wasn't allowed to talk about this type of thing. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, the GRCU, I said they like taking long exposures. This was a 40-second exposure, and this is typical of some of the things they caught. They found they were capturing orbs, and from some of the orbs, they actually got entities. Now, some of them had halos, some of them had horns, but they found that the entities will be coming out of the orbs. And in this case, you've got like what looks almost like bird-like forms that are manifesting from the orb. I'd say this was a 40-second exposure. There were some other photographs, part of this, showing when they first came out from the orb, but I thought this was probably the clearest and the better photograph to show you. But they caught a lot of things like this, and they also caught some objects which looked like pterodactyls flying high with outstretched wings above the town of Aranzano. They captured whole groups of these objects, and some of them even looked like turkeys, and they were blinking and pulsating, and they captured a lot of these types of objects. And although they, these things were never visible, they basically just relying on their instrumental detection, like the Geiger counter and the magnetic compass deviations, to let them know when these things are there. So they're basically shooting blind, and half the time they're not composing the actual shot, they're just shooting wherever the instruments are aiming in the dark. So a lot of the time they never caught anything at all, but when they did capture things, they certainly caught something that was very, very interesting. Next one, please. So this was captured, this snake-like object is another long exposure. I think it's a 40-second exposure. This was captured on the night of a huge forest fire which was sweeping through the forest of Aranzano. They took quite a few photographs of this object, and also they caught some objects in the sky as well. But at the time I think they had magnetic deviations of up to 10 degrees at the time that this snake-like object appeared. And they also got Geiger counter readings which were 3 times the normal background radiation levels. And very often these readings will just be like a huge peak, and it may even last just for a fraction of a second. And that's what I found during my work. It's not always a constant reading. You'll suddenly get a massive high peak, and the trick is to actually take photographs right then and there as these things are manifesting, because a lot of them seem to appear in the infrared and then go back again, so they're not permanently in the infrared. And a lot of objects don't appear in the infrared unless they're actually illuminated by infrared light or from the light of a flash. Although no flash was taken using this, but they did use infrared and ultraviolet flash lamps, and they found some good results with that as well. So this is quite an interesting one, because there's been a lot of these types of things captured in the sky, especially in Mexico. They've captured these worm-like objects, and there's a good example captured in Scotland. But this is actually at ground level. And they reckon it was a couple of 100 metres away from the researchers when they took these photographs. And you can actually see the trail that it's left etched into the film emulsion. And they, probably attracted by the fire, because these things do get attracted to energy. Whether it be phone lines or power lines, or maybe the energy from the fire, as in the same as the things that are captured over the blast furnace. They seem to be attracted to sort of energy releases. Next one, please. Yeah, they also captured a lot of invisible plasmoidal light trails. Now, some of these trails they captured doing the time lapse, they found that they would be attaching themselves to street lights. And they took several photographs over like 40 seconds, and they found these objects would be attaching to street lights and then going to another street light, and they were zipping all over the place as if taking energy from the street lights. And this is one of many plasmodal light trails they actually captured. And again, this was a long exposure. I think this is another 40-second infrared exposure. And I think, again, this was taken on colour infrared film. There's a slight green tint, but I'm not sure if you can actually see that from here. But in some cases, they found that these objects would actually appear on the film even before the photograph was taken. It's almost like the particular energy that these things are made of seemed to go through the camera and impose itself on the film, even between frames. And there's several photographs they took where you could see actually between the frames where these objects had imposed themselves, and they were printed all over the whole of the negative, which is quite strange. And so you know, I mean, they had the advantage of having 25 people there taking photographs. Most of them were using infrared film, some used normal standard film, and they actually found that these things appeared slightly on some of the standard film. And they used a whole range of different photograph cameras as well. And, you know, they captured thousands of things. There's a whole archive of GRCU stuff that goes on for nearly 10 years, apparently, and it's just disappeared, which is a very, very big pity. And I'd certainly like to get my hands on some of that, to be quite honest with you. And I myself have actually captured similar things to this during my work with Quest of the Invisibles.
Can I have the next slide, please?
Now, at the same time as the GRCU, there's a guy called Florin Georgica, who was actually active in Romania, which was then behind the Iron Curtain. Now, he was acting independently of Boccone and the GRCU, and he captured a lot of really nice things. This was actually taken at the edge of a huge forest in Romania. And the road that you see going around the left is actually a really wide, it's a two-lane road. So it gives you an idea of the actual size of this object. And again, you see the ovoid form. And I think the original photograph of this was white, yellow and blue. And, you know, they look almost like organisms, a lot of these things. I mean, some have, like, you know, proper creature-like characteristics, but some of them, you know, look slightly different. They look almost like organisms. But this thing looks absolutely huge, and you can see the light underneath it, where it's landed. It's landed in some kind of a field or something. You know, Florin Georgica carried on his work for many years, and he has got a few books out. But I've tried to get hold of a few of his books, but they're all in Romania, and I've had a few problems with some of the Romanian sites. You know, I was a bit worried about, you know, buying things from Romania, because one of the sites I tried to buy a book from actually tried to take the money out 4 or 5 times. I ended up having to cancel my card after that, so I didn't really venture forward and proceed to buy some of the books that I wanted to buy with Florin Georgica's footage in it.
Okay, can I have the next one, please?
So here we see, you know, the fact that these types of objects, especially these ovoid objects, have been captured going right back to 1958 with Trevor James Constable. There's one there of his daughter in 1975, and you've got Florin Georgica in 1977, and the GRCU Italy 1981. So they captured lots and lots of these ovoid objects, and also a lot of spherical objects, a lot of disc-like objects, and you know, a lot of even cigar-shaped objects as well. But many of them didn't seem to be nuts and bolts craft. They actually seemed to be biological in nature, and many of them seemed to be able to phase in and out of the reality and change their size, their position, and their luminosity in a drop of a hat. So this is kind of just giving an idea of, you know, how long this kind of thing, you know, this evidence has been going back right to 1958. You know, I did a lot of research on UFOs, and I never found out any of this until I discovered the work of Trevor James Constable. So,
Okay, can I have the next one, please?
so here we see the obvious creature-like characteristics. You've got A and B, which were captured by Trevor James Constable, where you've got the amoeba-like objects with obvious eyes and markings, vacuole-like markings. You've got the bird-like entities in C, which were captured by the GRCU. Then you have the snake-like entity, which is captured again by the GRCU. And as I say, a lot of the objects they captured, a lot of them were creature-like in appearance, but a lot of them actually look like organisms. So there's two very different things going on. And they did actually capture some craft-like objects, although I haven't got pictures of those. They did a lot of filming near a major airport in Italy, quite near to the steelworks, and they captured some what looked like little scout craft actually flying right above the main runway. But they're very, very tiny photographs. They don't really show that well. So they did capture a fair share of craft-like objects as well as these sort of types of objects as well. And it's the same with Constable. Trevor James Constable actually captured pyramid-like craft, which look quite etheric. And again, they don't show very well because of the nature of them being reflected infrared light. So it wasn't all like biological creatures he was capturing. A lot of them look like sort of discs, of actual flying discs that didn't actually look biological. So there's quite a mishmash of phenomena that they found they could capture in the invisible. And of course these things do come into the visible as well. There's been several reports over the years, going back a couple of 100 years, of these sort of sky creatures being seen in the sky and people having run-ins with them whilst flying. There's even a case mentioned in one of Constable's books where a couple of guys landed on a mesa, and one of these objects, pretty similar to the amoeba in A, actually came and crash landed on a mesa near to them, and it actually had a big bite out of it, and it was oozing like metallic froth. And then a huge object came down above it, which was so bright they couldn't even look at it. And it basically, two suckers came from underneath it, and it went down, lifted this object up, and shot up, like 500 miles an hour, and took this other object back up into the sky with it. So, there's been a lot of these things have been seen over the years by people in the visible.
Right, if you got the next one, please.
Here we go again. The fact is, these things are real, and they are coming into our reality, even though they're invisible. The fact that you're getting increased radiation readings. Now, the normal radiation readings from the work I do, I normally find that radiation readings, the normal background level, sits just under 1 microsievert per hour, normally 0.09. It might go up to 0.12. But basically, some of these will go up to 0.3, 0.40, which is like 4 times higher than the background levels. And at the same time, you'd actually get deviations in the magnetic compass as well. And some of them that were using the light and heat and the ultraviolet detectors and infrared detectors, they get multiple hits at the very same time, all of them. So they would all start taking photographs of the same things. So it just shows that these things are actually, although they're invisible, they are actually in this reality. And for some reason they're causing radiation. It's hard to tell whether it's beta, gamma, or because a lot of the Geiger counters, like mine, measures beta, gamma, and X-ray. But I sort of suspect it's either gamma radiation or it's organ energy in a highly charged state, which is known as oronor. It's something I'm looking into, along with one of my friends and fellow researchers, academic organ researcher Leon Southgate, who I went on to write co-write a two-part paper with, all about this type of thing, which I'll mention a bit later. So these objects are there, there's a lot of people saying, oh, these things were marks on the emulsions, they weren't real, but the fact is you've got a lot of data backing these things up. You had like 25 witnesses that were seeing, capturing these things, multiple photographs taken of these events, and magnetic deviations and many increased radiation readings. As I said, some of these radiation readings will just last for a split second and then they'll be back to normal. Or sometimes they'll last for quite a while as these things are sort of manifesting and hanging around. Next one, please. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a little bit and talk about, go over this sort of a bit more. So basically, before I get on to my work, I think we're going to have a bit of a break before I actually start my work with Quest of the Invisibles. But having found out all this about Trevor James Constable and the actual Italian UFO research group, it really, really interested me because the objects I saw that Christmas, although I thought it was a craft initially, it actually reminded me of a bioluminescent life form from the deep ocean, and that disturbed me because I'd always considered that UFOs were ships from other planets. And to see this thing at, say, 150 to 200 foot above me, at no more than walking pace, which allowed me to walk underneath it, I could see it, and I actually matched my breath at the time. I was like breathing in and out as I was walking. I was actually matching my breath to the pulsations of this thing. And it seemed to pulsate as if it was breathing as well, and it would slowly change colour from sort of pink to sort of orange. And then it would completely disappear in the mist, so you could hardly see it. Now, this was Christmas Day evening at about sort of 8 o'clock. And it freaked me out that much that I very nearly started knocking on people's doors and saying, look at this, look, UFO, UFO. You know, there's no one for me to show. There's nobody else out there. I was the only person walking a dog in the freezing cold weather on Christmas Day evening. Everyone else was shut up, you know, in their houses watching telly. But I very, very nearly started banging on people's doors and saying, hey, come and have a look at this. But I thought I'd perhaps get locked up. They think I'm drunk or on drugs or something. But it was a wonderful thing. To me, it was like a religious happening. It burnt so deeply into my mind, and it changed my life. Because at the time I was doing a language course. I've been doing it for 3 years at university. And I quit the course because after I saw that object that I saw, I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat. I lost 1.5 stone in weight. I stopped eating, I couldn't sleep, I didn't know what I'd seen, and I just didn't understand what I'd seen because I didn't ever think that there could be living creatures up there in the sky. I always thought they had to be crafts, you know, with entities in them. And I didn't see any reason why, you know, there should be anything else other than that. So it changed everything for me. I gave up my language course and used every bit of money I had, including some money that my mum left when she died, and started buying equipment. So I went on to buy got myself 2 infrared cameras and a couple of camcorders, which I had altered. Now, basic cameras and camcorders, they have what's known as a blocking filter in there, or hot mirror. And what that does is that blocks any invisible light, like infrared or ultraviolet, so that the picture you're taking is actually in the visible spectrum, and you don't get any unnatural colours in there. So what these people do is they take the filter out and replace it with clear quartz, which opens up the camcorder or camera to visible light, ultraviolet and infrared. And you can then use a variety of different filters to filter what you want. So for example, you can get rid of normal visible light and ultraviolet and just see just infrared, or you can see get rid of infrared and invisible light and just see ultraviolet, or you can see a mixture of ultraviolet and infrared and block the visible light. So I ended up getting all that kind of equipment, and you know, I thought it'd give me half a chance to sort of start my own work and to start trying to see what I could capture. How are we doing for time anyway now?
5 to by here.
Yeah. So after the break, I'm going to start going into my work and explain a bit more about some of the techniques that I used for my work. But you know, in my mind, Trevor James Constable was a real pioneer, and so was Luciano Boccone. I mean, these guys were out there dedicating their lives to trying to capture this type of stuff, and they captured some amazing things. They captured a lot of different entities. I say some of them had horns, some of them had halos. A lot of them seemed to appear in from an orb. An orb would suddenly appear, and then these objects would come from within the orb. And some of them would just hop down to the ground and go walking off, or some of them would go floating off. So there's a very big paranormal type thing that was happening. This is something I found. You know, a lot of the orbs I've photographed, I've captured some that seem to have, they've got eyes and faces on them. And I know from a couple of friends of mine, my friend in America, he filmed some orbs, and basically from the orb came a ray. And in this ray, there was loads of little beings with helmets on, stacked one on top of another. They were actually coming, it seemed, from another dimension straight into this reality, in like a tube of light. And he had a lot of vandalism going on in his house, so he set up a Super 8 camera to take photographs every 2 seconds to try and capture the culprits. And he captured some crazy things. He captured some photographs where a different coloured, a different sky appeared just for a second, and it's like a load of factory-like units appeared, and then it would go back to his garden, and then these factory units would appear again. And then you had these really weird reptilian beings that would turn up, and then as soon as the reptilian beings turned up, an orb would come, and then from out of this orb would come these tiny little beings that looked about 3 foot high, holding onto some kind of a pole, and coming down, stacked one on top of each other, straight into this reality, although still invisible. And in some cases he found, as I mentioned earlier, that these objects would actually burn themselves onto the film in between frames when the camera wasn't even filming. So we got a lot of things like that. And one time the camera fell down, so it was at an angle. So basically, when you've got a camera at an angle, everything that happens, you know, you film with that camera comes at an angle. But these things weren't. These things were coming straight down. So it was obviously they were avoiding the whole the camera lens. They were obviously just putting themselves onto the film's emulsions without doing it through the camera. You know, the energy that they were made of seemed to be enough to actually just imprint itself on the film and in between frames as well. So he ended up catching a lot of really, really strange things, and there's quite a few people I've been in touch with as well over the years that have captured entities and various kind of things similar to Trevor James Constable and the GRCU. So I kind of made it my mission really to try and get Constable's work out there, because Constable passed away in 2016. So Luciano Boccone from the GRCU, he died in 1980, and most of the people in the GRCU died as well. So it's very hard to get a copy of that book, UFO, La Realtà Nascosta, UFO, the Hidden Reality. So I've made it my mission really to try and get these people's work out there, just so people can look at it and make up their own minds. You know, I'm not trying to push this on people and say this is this, this is that. That's the way it is. You know, people make up their own mind about it, and it's as simple as that. So I can only talk about, you know, the things I've experienced and the things I've managed to uncover through my research into this type of photography and that. So there definitely are a lot of strange creatures out there. There's strange things flying around in the sky. There seems to be entities which are invisible. They're in this reality but invisible, and they can affect you in this reality. They can make themselves visible if they want, and they can affect you know, lights and things. I've had lights in my bedroom suddenly just appearing, and all my lights have been flickering, or in the pitch darkness I'll get like a white light appear in the room. So there's a lot of strangeness goes, especially with these things, especially when you start researching this type of thing. You'll find that there seems to be a big paranormal element to the whole UFO thing when you're doing kind of photography that I'm doing. It's almost like you're egging these things on to actually appear sometimes. I've got to the point now where I've had such weird things going on in my reality that I've seriously considered kind of not doing it anymore. Things where, like, you know, my doorbell would ring at 3 in the morning, and it'd ring in my sister's room as well, my sister's house. I live next door to my sister on the same land, but we've got like a link with the doorbell in case parcels come. So if her doorbell rings, it rings upstairs in mine. And we had a rake of things happening, footsteps coming up the stairs. The doorbell would be ringing 3 times every morning at 3 in the morning. We had food disappear. We had a photograph turned up of my dad that none of us had ever seen before. It just suddenly appeared underneath my sister's jumper. And we had like knockings on the door. The lights would be constantly dimming, going on and off. Things would go missing. Electronic things would just break down or go haywire. So the more you kind of research this type of thing, you know, you've got to be aware that the more you open yourself up there with the intent of capturing things, other things might manifest and, you know, start to trouble you. So you've got quite a strong sort of willpower really to keep going on at it, and it's always handy to, you know, get some kind of protection as well, because some of the stuff I've photographed, it looked pretty demonic. I photographed an entity with horns in my greenhouse. I had a spate of photographs I captured in my greenhouse. I actually used a flash to light the greenhouse up the minute I got hit on the Geiger counter, and this flash from the visible light, although I saw the whole white visible light lighting up the greenhouse, and I saw nothing in the greenhouse, the infrared camera only saw a tiny bit of the barely visible red that occurs just before the infrared. So although I saw the big white flash, the infrared camera only saw a tiny bit of this red. But that red was enough to light up the area around these entities and make them appear in the infrared. Because many of them don't reflect the light, because they're so dark. But you can actually get like the light around them, which actually, you know, shows them to you. So, and I've been doing this for 12 years, my work, which I'm going to go into in a little bit now. But, you know, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now without the earlier work of Trevor James Constable. And I managed to write to Constable before he died, and it told him, you know, just told him how grateful I was for what he did. And so I told him I was thinking of starting my work rather than using infrared film. I'm going to use like a digital camera. And he was, you know, he said it's a good idea, and he really, really encouraged me. And it was a pity because he died about 3 months before my book came out. So, and I was really hoping he was going to, like, you know, read my book and perhaps even write a forward to it, but that didn't happen. So the thing that really gets me out there doing this is really trying to push Trevor James Constable's work out there and just put over the idea that some of these things are biological. They're not all nuts and bolts craft. I mean, there are nuts and bolts craft out there, but a lot of things, a lot of these lights in the sky that people are seeing and things, they seem to be living entities, and a lot of them seem to be telepathic as well. You can call them in. A lot of them will appear in the visible spectrum and in the invisible as well. But they seem to respond as well to flashing lights up into the sky. In the daytime you can use a mirror, you can flash a light, and you'll often see these things appearing and they'll flash back to you. But you know, you've got to err on the side of caution when you start doing this kind of thing seriously, because you know, people say, well, that's a great photograph, that's a great thing you've captured, but when you're doing this day in, day out, like I have for 12 years, that becomes your reality. When you're sort of living it and, you know, eating it and dreaming it, and it's, you know, and you find weird things happening, and before you know it, that is your reality. And most people don't even believe this stuff exists or aren't even aware of it. But when you're experiencing it all the time, it can certainly make you feel very cut off from, you know, from mainstream society, and it can get quite scary at times. Okay, so 10. Well, I had that encounter of mine in 2008, but obviously it took me a couple of years to really get into this research and to get my equipment. But in 2010, I started going out into the garden using a cloudbuster, which I basically put together from the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich. It's basically quite simple cloudbuster. As you can see, it's just got 3 pipes and it's grounded in running water. 1, 2, 1, 2. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right, it's not too narrow, am I? 2, right.
You're all right.
Okay, so here's the first cloudbuster I actually built, and I started using it in 2010 from my garden. Basically, my garden is about 1 acre of land, and it's surrounded by trees. And I've got quite a clear view of the sky, so I put together this cloudbuster, started using it, started taking photographs, and on the right hand side that's an infrared view with the cloudbuster. But I started taking photographs, random photographs at first, and I found that very often I'd capture things, but they all seemed to be 2,000 to 3,000 feet in the air. And I could never seem to get them any closer than that. And I noticed that although many of them were craft-like, I found that I'd take like anything up to 10 photographs, like even like 1,000 frames, 1,000th of a second, and these objects would just appear in one frame. Or where they appeared in 3 or 4 frames, they seemed to change, morph and change their form in every single photograph, which I felt was weird. So I carried on kind of looking into the infrared, and I just couldn't seem to get any sort of really clear stuff. I've got some good images, but they don't show too well because a lot of them are very bright white. So, but something did happen in 2011. Next slide, please. In 2011, I was very lucky that one of these objects actually came into the visible spectrum. Now, one afternoon, I'd been working with a cloudbuster all afternoon, and I'd noticed a really small. All I could see was a really small dark ball, which was about 1,000 foot in the air. All I could see was a dark ball, nothing more than that. And I kept noticing it appearing and disappearing, going invisible and coming back again. And I thought it was a bit odd because over the afternoon it was doing like almost like a mile-wide circle of my research area, and I thought it was a bit strange. And then it disappeared, so I thought, okay. And just as I was actually tidying up for one night, I'd just taken the camcorder off the tripod. I'd just taken I had a full-spectrum camcorder which could see infrared, ultraviolet, and visible spectrum. I'd taken the actual pass filter off, and I looked up and actually saw this object and zoomed into it, and this is what it was. It doesn't look that good on here, but actually it's like an ovoid shape, and I basically, there's a video of this on YouTube called Strange Visible UFO. I've got the whole video of it, which is a few minutes long, which shows you me zooming into this object, and it shows you the object morphing and changing as it turns around. Now at one point, as I zoomed into it, I realised what it was. I nearly fell over because I didn't, I was like, what the hell is that? And what the object did, it seemed to know that I was watching it, and what it did, it deviated from its course and it went back round in a circle, and it turned round, and as it turned round it changed shape. As you can see, that's the back view of it. It seems to have 2 like, they're not like wheels, they look more like radar dishes. so you've got the second one where it's turned round, and I've actually got some of the stills from this where it goes even thinner than that. As it turned round, it went really thin and actually looked like a teardrop. And then it basically, as it turned around even more, it ended up looking like a proper egg shape again. And I got really confused. I was thinking, how can something do that? Because I thought this was like a nuts and bolts type thing, but it seemed to just change. And I was so perplexed by it, I went out and bought a load of modelling clay and a load of bits of wire. I thought, well, I'm going to make a model of this, you know. So I made a model, made the basic egg shape, and used the wire so I could get the, you know, the bits out the side. And it just didn't look right. I thought, well, hang on a minute, it's looking thinner on one of the shots, and it went almost almond shape. And I was thinking, well, how can I make it look almond shape but still keep the roundness? Because it came back to that proper round, full egg shape. And I gave up in the end because I just could not create a model of this thing because it just didn't make sense. And if you look at the video, you'll see it starts off like on the left and it goes to like the one in the middle, and then it just seems to go like a teardrop, and it completely goes really, really thin, and then by the time it's turned back around again, it starts to get fat again and look like an actual egg shape. So I don't know what the hell this thing was, but I was very, very lucky to be able to zoom in. And if you want to go on YouTube and have a look at it, it's called Strange Visible UFO, and it's on my Quest for Invisible's YouTube channel, which is just QFTI. And it's quite a popular video, but you'll see it in its full glory, and it looks a lot better than, you know, the pictures you're seeing on here, because these are just like stills taken from it. They don't show that well. But it's a very, very strange object, and it's pretty typical of some of the objects that I was actually capturing really high in the sky in the infrared, which were very, very small. And I was very, very lucky that this thing came down a lot, you know, a lot lower, and allowed me to film it. But at the moment it turned round, it's like it knew I was filming it. It then just went, shot off across the sky, and I disappeared in front of my eyes. Completely went, and I couldn't even see it. I put the filter back on, the infrared filter, onto the camcorder, and I couldn't even see it in the infrared. It just completely disappeared. And I was thinking, oh my God, you know, is this some kind of government thing they've sent like to keep an eye on me because I was using the cloudbuster? I really didn't know, but it's obviously attracted, I think, by the cloudbuster. So I carried on filming in the infrared, taking photographs and video footage, and I just couldn't seem to catch anything that clear. So I decided then to try the ultraviolet. I thought, okay, there's not many people, to my knowledge, who've really filmed in the ultraviolet. So I got myself a brand new camcorder, which I had altered so that it could see infrared, ultraviolet and visible. And what I did was used a 330nm ultraviolet pass filter. This blocks out visible colour and the infrared and passes almost pure ultraviolet. So this is what I started to use in the ultraviolet. Can you put the next one on, please? And thank you. Next one. And here we see it, yeah. So I've got the full spectrum converted camcorder, which sees in its basic state infrared, visible and ultraviolet, because what they've done, they've put a piece of clear quartz into it, which basically opens it right up to the full spectrum. And then I use a 330nm UV pass filter, which allows me to sort of just see the UV. Now this was a very, very dark filter, and when I started filming with it, I found that even on a warm day with lots of radiation, when I was filming straight into the sky, it was very, very dark and I couldn't get clear footage. So I realised that somehow I had to get some sunlight into the actual scene. And I thought, well, I don't want to aim directly into the sun because it's not good, you know, for the camcorder, and also you get spurious kind of shadows and things, you know, it's just basically not good to have the full sun, you know. So I came up with another idea. Have you got the next thing, please? So basically I decided to start using the sun obliteration technique. So what I did was I started utilising bits of a nearby roof, which was like a first-storey roof. What I'd do is set up the camcorder, set it up through the view, through the viewing screen. And what I would do, I'd block the sun behind the top of the main roof, and then basically zoom in to the top of the roof, and so that I was actually focusing on the top of the roof. And I found that it creates an area which I call the illumination zone, because anything passing through that point, or just above it, or in the back of it, is totally illuminated by the sun as it reaches that point. And the secret is to actually keep adjusting the position of the camcorder so that the sun doesn't come any higher than that. Because obviously you get a total whiteout if you, you know, to get the sun coming right over, and it can damage your equipment. So I began using this sun obliteration technique. Now, one of the early things I captured was actually a jellyfish, which was swimming, there's a picture of that on my website, It doesn't show that well on the slide, but it actually was going tentacles first across the top of the roof. And I thought, wow, that's strange, because I've never captured anything that looked just like a jellyfish before. So this was the next one I captured. This was so I've captured several of these type things, like mushroom type objects, and Trevor James Constable captured the same. Now in the first still there, you see it coming straight into the illumination zone. Now as it reaches the middle of the illumination zone, the whole thing's lit up, revealing the actual mushroom-like shape. And then as it passes the illumination zone, it completely disappears again. So a lot of these objects captured in the ultraviolet, they're basically invisible in the ultraviolet until they're illuminated by ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Now some of them are self-illumined and they don't require illumination, but I say 99% of the things I've captured are only visible just for a split second as they pass through this illumination zone. Then as soon as they pass this zone, they're gone, totally invisible again. And many of these things, I mean, sometimes I record at 25 frames a second, and one of my camcorders is 50 frames a second. And I found that many of these things will only appear in 1 or 2 frames, sometimes 3 or 4, but mainly in 1 or 2. So this was probably the clearest mushroom-like thing that I've ever captured. And what I was also doing at the same time was filming with a camcorder or a movie mode, camera in movie mode, which was filming the visible spectrum. And I found that these things weren't appearing in the visible spectrum. They appeared in the infrared or the ultraviolet, but they didn't show at all in the visible spectrum. And that's a lot of footage to look through, because I was out for sometimes 5 or 6 days a week. I was filming for 7 hours a day, filming at 50 frames a second, which is 3,000 frames a minute. Now I'd use a Geiger counter, which would give me an indication of when these things were coming past. So I'd end up with millions and millions of frames to look through, with a rough idea where the Geiger counter had gone off. I'd know it was somewhere like near 5 minutes 10 or 5 minutes 20, because I quickly glanced. So I'd spend literally weeks and weeks looking back through millions and millions of frames just to capture these things just in 1 or 2 frames, and it's very, very tiring. I did this for 5 years non-stop because of back problems I've got. I don't work, so I had more time to kind of do that. But some days I'd be out there for 5 or 6 hours a day, and I may spend like 2 months looking back through the footage that I've taken, knowing that I've captured something, because there's several times when the Geiger counter would go off. So I knew that there's something there, because this energy that these things are made of, or they're giving off, actually creates radiation and gets picked up on the Geiger counter. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is pretty typical of some of the things I captured shooting across the sky. These shimmering objects. Now these are taken all on a tripod. This is one of several images that I've taken of similar things to this, where the object would just change its shape as it went through the sky. And this is probably the best example of these types of things, but in some cases they would appear in 2 frames and they would just totally disappear again, and it wouldn't, you wouldn't see them again. This has gone straight into the illumination zone, but this seems pretty self-illumined itself, and as I said, a lot of these things seem to be self-illumined. They don't require the reflection of the UV from the sun. But I thought I'd show this one. This is taken from my book Quest of the Invisibles, but I just find this one quite amazing, the way the thing looks different in every frame. This was recorded, I think, at 25 frames per second. You can just see the sunlight just behind the gutter covering. So it's hard to tell what the actual size of these things are, because when you're looking straight up at 45 degrees, you're focused on the top of the roof or on the edge of the guttering. And the camcorder's got a good depth of field, so these things could be a lot further away, and it's just that they're quite big, but in the distance it's very hard to tell. It's hard to sort of get a good size for them. Could you do the next one, please? Okay, so this is an example of some of these objects that don't seem to fit any type of I don't know the reasoning behind these things. It's hard to tell. I mean, these things seem to move silently and with purpose, but a lot of them don't seem to have no obvious means of propulsion. And what I found is that during some of my work, there seemed to be a west to east etheric flow, and many of these things seem to be travelling from right to left, which was west to east across the top of the roof. And this is something that Dr. Reich talked about, this what he called the Orwell energy envelope of the Earth. And he said that in some areas of the Earth it travels from west to east, and a lot of these things seem to be travelling on or caught up on this flow. But some of these things don't make sense at all. I mean, you know, you've got like a propeller type object at the top, and then you've got the thing at the bottom. And I think I caught this in 2 frames. In the first frame, all you could see was a bit of a propeller type bit, and then this in the second one. And these objects, I've caught similar ones to these, and they change their shape in every single frame that you capture them in. And, you know, and aerodynamically, they don't seem to fit, you know. So I just don't know what this type of object is. It's beyond anything I've really seen before. It's just very, very hard to explain. It's just another weird thing. I also captured around this time what looked like a chair moving across. It was like a chair. It had like a human-like entity on it, but the entity seems to be made of the same material as the chair, which is like pure white. It also always looked like marble, and it was just merrily flying through the sky. You know, I think that's in my book, Quest of the Invisibles, that one. It's a very strange one. It's like a generic human being that seems to be moulded to the chair. So you get some very, very strange things coming, you know, in the ultraviolet especially. And you can catch them a lot lower than what I was finding with the infrared. You've got the next slide, please. So this is one of the stranger ones I captured. This was captured in 3 frames. The object almost looks like a tin can in the middle. I don't know if you can see that very well, that one, but it's got these kind of sticks. It's travelling from left to right. And I caught that in 3 frames, and it's quite big, whatever it is. I don't think it's as near as the rooftop as what it seems, but I don't know. Ben Jones calls this one the light bulb. It reminds me of a light bulb. But you can see these stick things in every single frame as it comes. So I've got no idea what this is. I mean, at first I thought it was biological, but it almost looks like a nuts and bolts thing. You've almost got like it reminds me of like a baked bean tin or something in the middle of it with several rods sticking out of it. So I really don't know kind of what to think of this one, although it is one of my favourite captures. And I've captured several things like this, but this is by probably the best I've captured, the best quality footage I've captured in 3 frames. Because very often these things will either be too near, too far away, a bit blurred, or not catching the sun correctly, or too far away. But this was just dead perfect. So we've got the next. So here's an obvious kind of biological worm-like kind of entity. This was captured straight above the roof of my sister's house, which was a second-storey building. And I've been using the cloudbuster all morning, aiming straight up at that exact point, and I set the camcorder to actually film where the cloudbuster was pointing. This was captured at 50 frames a second, and this only appeared in 1 frame. So it was either sitting there in the sky and it just made itself visible and disappeared again, or it was travelling by immense speed and just figured in 1 frame out of the 50 frames per second. But it almost looks like a chrysalis type kind of worm-like thing. So, and quite a few of the people I know have captured similar things to this in both the infrared and the ultraviolet. But you can see it's just kind of catching the edges of the sun. You can see it's kind of shimmering from the sunlight, which is held right down behind the roof. And it's very important when you do this type of photography to keep adjusting the camcorder, because in the summer sometimes, depending on which roof you're using to film, the sun will rise. And you've got to keep you've got to use the view through the camcorder to constantly keep altering the camcorder to keep the sun right behind the roof. Otherwise, you just get a huge whiteout, and in most cases, the camcorder will just switch off because it gets overloaded. So this is probably one of my kind of favourite ones as well. This one is where it's just sitting there in the sky. Can we have the next one, please? Okay, so this is one of several. I've caught several of these objects. There's another one coming up in a minute, but this is a strange one. It almost looks like fish-like, but you can see it's almost got like rudders or something. It's almost like airship-like. But if you look at the very back of it, you'll see it's got kind of looks like 3 or 4 kind of rudder shapes, like a tail of some sort. And I've done an inverted image to try and give you a bit more of a view of it. And if you go to the next slide, this is another one that I captured that looks slightly similar. And again, you've got like that kind of body, which is almost looks like fish-like, but it also looks like a blimp or something. I'm not sure what those appendages are at the back, whether they kind of look like tail fins or something, don't they? So if you go on to the next one, you can see that both of these together, here you go. These are captured above the same part of the building, almost a year apart. They're very, very subtle, these things, and I think they only appeared in one frame. As soon as it passed this point, they were invisible totally, you couldn't see anything. And again, they didn't show in the visible light that was actually filming the same scene at the same time. And, you know, while we're talking about these kind of fish life forms, I just want to go on to the skyfish thing a minute, if you want to pass to the next one. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the rods skyfish controversy thing that started with Jose Escamilla, the whole rods thing. Well, I looked very, very carefully into this. Can you give us the next one, please? I basically, on purpose, for about 4 or 5 months, filmed insects using a movie mode. I filmed them from various different distances away from the camera lens. I think these were taken using a standard camera in movie mode. A is a mosquito, which was about 2 foot away from the screen and heavily reflecting the sun. You can see the repeats of the wings, which give it an appearance of a white rod-like object with appendages. B is actually a moth, a small moth with small wings, giving it like a baton-like effect. C is like a really tiny little midge, which is only about 1.5 foot away from the actual from the camcorder. And D again is another mosquito. And if you go to the next, here we see here multiple repeats of the mosquito's wings and body create the illusion of a long rod-like creature with multiple wing-like appendages. And this is what a lot of people were actually thinking were, you know, a new species of creature, you know, rods, basically. But I spent a long time, I was recording almost every creature you could imagine in various different places, because my garden's got like a swampy area, it's got like trees. I set up, you know, lots of different camcorders, lots of different ways of recording, and I tried them, you know, like several feet away from the camcorder or the movie mode recording. And I found that if insects are more than a couple of feet away and not reflecting the sun, all you get is like a dark, blurry shape. But if they are reflecting the sun and they're within a couple of feet of the actual screen, well, the camcorder, then this is what you'll get. Anything up to 5, 6, 7 repeats. So that's basically just the same mosquito that's been stretched by the interlaced video recording. Just giving the impression of a long rod-like creature. So, you know, I'd say that 99% of the things that I've seen presented as rods or, you know, skyfish are insects. But that still leaves 1%. And the fact is, a lot of people have captured these other objects, which are like torpedoes or missile-like objects. And I think one famous case was caught at Albany Airport, and I think the FBI were quite interested in it. I think it was Brendan Lowry, I think, a photojournalist, took some video at an airport and captured one of these huge missile-like objects. So, and apart from that, there's a lot of other things that are up there. So even if you dismiss 99% of what people have captured as skyfish stroke rods, it still leaves a lot of other things. So I'm going to show you some images now, which I class as skyfish. This is what I see. Okay, so this is typical of some of the objects I've captured. And you can see the actual angle of this. You can see how it's tilted. Because I'm filming from a 45-degree angle, looking up at it, you can actually see it's got like a tail on it, and you can actually see the thickness where the sun is reflecting from the top rim of this thing, and I've done an enlargement at the top. But I've captured a whole load of things like this that seem to be sort of swimming or caught up on this west to east flow that I've been talking about. If you pass on to the next one, okay, here we go. There's another fish-like form as well. And you can see the actual, you know, this isn't a repeat of wings, you know, this is not what this is. You can see there's an actual fish-like body on this, and you've actually got tail-like parts. And if you pass on to the next one, here's another object that I caught as well. This was like a plasmodal fish, but rather than travelling through the sky like a fish would, this thing was spinning through itself. And if you go on to the next one, you'll see that, here we go, it's 4 successive frames captured at 50 frames per second of this object. And it was basically spinning through itself, actually spinning as it moved, rather than going like a normal fish. And I've captured a lot of things in the ultraviolet like this that seem to spin. I've captured these objects in the infrared actually that I call spinning jennies. They seem to be like a fish, like a manta ray, and rather than swimming through the air, they seem to arch their body, point their head down, and then they spin the wings in a fashion pretty similar to this, and they spin through themselves. And there's some footage of this on my Quest of the Invisible's YouTube channel, some of my early footage. There's quite a lot of things like this. So these objects, they seem to be plasmatic, they seem to be very, very bright. And again, this was captured at 50 frames per second. I was actually recording with a standard camcorder at the time, filming the visible spectrum, and this didn't show at all. And it didn't show in the infrared, so I was filming an infrared visible light and the ultraviolet, and this thing only showed in the ultraviolet. But these to me, I class these as skyfish, fish-like forms. And they're clearly not insects because you don't get that repeat of the wings. And I've captured a whole load of things like this as well. This is just kind of an example of some of the things that I've captured. And I think this is taken from my website, and there's an actual link on the website to see the actual live footage of this as it's spinning and moving through the sky. There's quite a few links on the website, and so you can look at some of these things. And you can see that this one's actually going from right to left, and you can see actually on the third still, there's like it's spun through itself. It's like a big flurry of activity as it's spinning, and it's come back facing the same sort of way, or the opposite way to what it was as it goes. So it's actually just spinning through itself. And the centrepiece, the dark bit, was staying where it was, while the actual fish-like body shape was spinning through itself, moving at a tremendous speed. Okay, you got the next one, please? Okay, so yeah, the three-dimensionality. See, whereas a lot of UFO images, and especially a lot of the ones captured by Constable, look very 2D, I kind of aim with my work to try and get a certain three-dimensionality to them. And by capturing them at 45 degrees, looking straight up the roof, you're actually seeing them from sort of underneath and sideways, so it's very easy to sort of capture a better image of them, rather than capturing them face on, or just sort of blankly on the side. You catch them at an angle, which actually brings out the dimensions, makes them seem a bit more real. And these objects, you do get a hit on a Geiger counter when these things go by, so something is happening, whether these are sort of in the reality all the time and invisible, or whether they're actually just coming in and out of this reality, and that's what you're picking up on the Geiger counter. I really don't know. They're either made of some energy or they're putting some energy out, which is being picked up by the Geiger counter. I'm starting to suspect that it's orgone energy, an excited form of orgone energy known as oronor, which is like an excited life energy. It's either excited through them coming into this reality, or it's the excitement is caused by their actual movement through this reality. I really don't know at the moment. It's something that I'm looking into, along with my friend and fellow researcher Leon Southgate. So if you want to pass to the next one, please. Right, so everything you've seen tonight, all the pictures of Trevor James Constable and the GRCU and my stuff I've just showed you now, they are all featured on this two-part paper, Positive Findings on Constable's Organotic Bioforms. So this was written with a good friend of mine, and Leon Southgate, who's an academic orgone researcher. I think it's about 17,000 words, I think, two-part paper, but it's available online at www.psychorgon.com. And you can see every single photograph that I've shown you tonight so far. Just about all of them are on that, if you're sort of interested in this type of thing. And there's a lot of information on there as well. It goes through the details of how they were captured and some of the readings I was getting at the time. So this is out there for everyone to see, and it's really kind of sticking up for Constable, because a lot of people came forward and tried to suggest that Trevor James Constable's and even the GRCU work were just marks on the emulsion, nothing more than dirty marks on the emulsion. These people just dismiss it just like that, but and as you can say, it's not. So we decided to do a paper in defence of Trevor James Constable's work, and trying to bring together Constable's work from the 1950s and the GRCU work from the early 1980s and my work from 2010, try to bring it all together under one umbrella, so to speak, in this paper. So if any of you are interested in this type of thing, then do have a look at the paper. You can get it, just go to www.psycorgon.com. There's also links to this on my website, which is questioninvisibles.co.uk. Right, so a quick drink a minute. So for 5 years I recorded in the ultraviolet, and I was out there, as I was saying, like 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and captured quite a few things. But I decided to start doing some nighttime footage. I was very into the things that I'd seen by Luciano Boccone. I was very intrigued by the things that he'd captured in the dark, him and his GRCU group, using a Geiger counter. And although I had used a Geiger counter to kind of give an indication when these things were coming by in the ultraviolet, I'd never used it, handheld it, and moved it around in front of me and positioned the camera to capture wherever I got the bus, the indication. So I decided to go full out with a digital camera, infrared converted digital camera, and using the Geiger counter. If we pass on to the next thing a minute. This is the Geiger counter I use. It's a Radex Geiger counter. It measures beta, gamma and X-rays. As I said, the normal background radiation levels for my area, or for most areas in UK, sit between 0.09 and 0.12 microsieverts per hour. And through a lot of constant work, I found that sudden high peaks of 0.20 microsieverts per hour and over are generally good indicators that invisible phenomena may be passing above your position or even manifesting nearby, albeit invisibly. Because most of the time these things don't come in, they don't appear visibly in the visible light spectrum. They're manifesting into the invisible. And in some cases you can capture them on camera, or in some cases you need to be using some kind of infrared illumination, or even the illumination from a flash is good enough sometimes to make them figure in the infrared. So it's a handy bit of kit. I mean, they don't come cheap, these objects, but it's a handheld device. So basically what I would do is put the camera around my neck and shorten it off so my camera was actually resting on my chest, and I'd have the Geiger counter in my left hand, and what I would do, I'd aim the Geiger counter up in my left hand up at 45 degrees, and what I'd do is I'd angle the camera, hold the camera against my chest, also pointing at 45 degrees. And the minute I get a hit on the Geiger counter, because I set mine to buzz rather than doing the sort of sound, because it attracts attention. So basically, as soon as the second I get like a hit on the Geiger counter, I'm instantly just taking photos straight up at the same angle at the sky. So I'm not composing the shot at all. You're basically just taking the shot as soon as you get the Geiger counter hit. So you're looking while you're filming, but you're not looking at the camera through the camera viewing thing. So you just, you don't know what you captured till you look at the photos afterwards. So in no way do you compose these shots at all. It's just literally walk along, stop, and the minute you get that hit, just take multiple photographs in the vicinity to where the Geiger counter is giving you the readings. And I got quite successful doing this. Now what happened was, around this time my cat, I took on a wild cat that was living in my sister's garden. I live at my sister's place, I live on her land, in a flat on her land. But I took on this wild cat called Roy, really nice cat, and he died from liver problems. He was about 8 when he died, and totally heartbroken. So I decided at first to go out into the garden, see if I could get any kind of photographs of him. I was convinced that he was still around because the dogs seemed to be detecting something. I kept getting this feeling that he was still around. One time I thought I heard a bump, because he used to jump off the settee and down onto the floor, and I thought I heard a bump, so I suspected he was still around. So I started going out to his grave site, and I'd sit there in pitch darkness. His grave site's on the edge of a woodland area which goes through my garden. It's on the edge of an old riverbank. So I set the camera up, the infrared camera, on a tripod. I'd aim it straight at the grave site, and I'd take photos in pitch darkness, no flash. And I'd sit there on a chair, I'd have the Geiger counter in one hand, and my right hand would be on the shutter button. And then the second I got a hit on the Geiger counter, I would take, for instance, anything between 1 second and 15-second exposures. If you move to the next one, please. Okay, so this was taken at Roy's gravesite. Basically, I'd put some flowers on his grave earlier that day, and I went outside and set the camcorder up, and I started getting massive hits on the Geiger counter. Took loads of photographs, handheld, couldn't capture anything at all. the dogs are starting to get weird. They kept looking over at the gravesite, and because I believe they can see the infrared, I couldn't see anything. Pitch dark, no flash in this. It was pitch dark. This was one of must have been about 100 photographs I took, and this was the only one that came out through those couple of days I was out there. And this thing, whatever it is forming right above his actual gravesite, a couple of inches above the gravesite. And it's two bursts of like plasma-like energy. And that was all caught within a 1 second exposure. And although they look quite similar, they are very different. You can see the complexities of the plasma streaks in this. I was quite pleased when I caught that out, because I'd been asking him for a sign that he was still around, to show me a sign he was still around. And I kept going out every single night. I'd be out there all night some nights, just sitting next to the gravesite with the camera kind of, about 5-6 feet away, aimed straight down at the gravesite, sitting in total darkness. I couldn't see nothing. And then I managed to capture something else. If you go on to the next one. So, okay, this is a light trail that I captured coming straight up from the gravesite. It's actually going, it's two light trails, and I'm not sure if you can see the top one there, but it looks like an entity, or two entities side by side. Now, under closer observation, you can see the entity seems to have his hands over his ears and his elbows coming forward. And I don't know how clear you can see that here, but if you look at it on a computer, you can see it's got a mouth and a nose and two eyes. So the light trail actually seems to be this entity going and shooting off, and it's not so evident in the second bit that came up. But again, I've got massive Geiger counter hits, so I think these things are shooting up constantly, because I kept getting Geiger counter hits and taking photographs in different areas, and I turned it round on the tripod and couldn't capture anything. But I got lucky this time. I actually turned right round back to the direction of the grave, got a Geiger counter hit, and basically took this photograph at 1 second exposure in complete darkness, no flash. So I saw nothing at all. So I continued kind of getting on with this. I thought, well, there's something going on here. This Geiger counter is really picking up something. So I carried on, and I think it was about a month later, I got what I consider to be one of my better photographs. Can you do the next one, please? Okay, so this is taken at Roy's gravesite in pitch darkness, right? No flash. I took 2 or 3 photographs, and the other photographs showed nothing but pitch darkness, nothing at all. So that's Roy's grave on the right. It's totally lit up. Some kind of energy is coming straight out of the grave and shooting up into like a snake-like object. And you've also got something at the bottom, which is like a half-human, half-like tree coming straight up. You can't see it on here very well, but it's actually got a nose and eyes. It's almost like a half-human, half-tree-like object right at the very bottom. And you've got some kind of a face coming down on the right-hand side, near where that whoosh kind of thing goes up. And you've got the whole gravesite lit up. Now, I saw nothing at all, nothing at all. It was pitch dark. I was very, very surprised to have even caught this. But I was actually saying at the time, please, Roy, please show yourself again for me. I really want to know if you're still around. So I took this photograph, and if you pass on to the next one, I've got an enlargement. Here you go. So this is an enlargement of that main snake-like entity thing, which has come straight from my cat's gravesite. And, getting huge Geiger counter hits again. And you can see it's got like a slitty type of eye. It's got an eye which looks quite slitty. It's got a beak. It looks like it's got 2 ears. It's got shimmering scale-like features. And you can also see where the head joins the neck. You've got this like plasmatic type of collar. It's almost like a collar where this thing has manifested and gone straight up there. So I'm still not sure, whether that is my cat Roy showing me he's okay, or whether it's something else. Because after this point, I started getting lots of paranormal stuff happening in the house. I started getting things moving, lights would start going off. I say the doorbells were ringing. Strange things would happen. The television would cut off. The lights around the house would start coming on. My gate lights were flashing seemed like about 1,000 flashes a second. I've never seen a light flash that fast, but weird things started happening whenever I was walking near them or out with my camera. It was very, very strange. So, but back onto the UFO thing now. So I was quite confident that I'd captured these things using the Geiger counter. So I knew that the Geiger counter was very effective for things manifesting nearby. So I decided to turn my hand back to filming, taking photographs back in the sky again. So I started, do you want to pass to the next one? So this is an object I captured. It was taken above a 100-foot tree in my garden, or a couple of 100-foot trees. I took 3 photographs. I think this was the middle photograph. The other photographs showed nothing at all. If you go on to the next one, I've lightened this up for you, and you can actually see there's actually a second object up there, which almost looks like a pulley, a rope pulley. But rather than this being a load of lights that are shooting off to the right, it's actually part of a much bigger structure which is invisible. And on the actual photograph, it goes more to the left and more to the right. And you can see, if you lighten it right up, you can see there's a physical structure beneath this which goes further to the left and further to right. And there's several unlit sections, so it's almost like this is some kind of power source maybe for the craft of what it was part of. And I got a huge guy counter here of 0.60 microsieverts per hour, the biggest hit I've ever had in my life. And this was taken, there's a 100-foot tree, I was probably stood back about 30 foot, and I was aiming straight up with a tripod, straight up at the trees, and the minute I got the hit, I basically took, I think this was taken 1/8 of a second, I took 3 photographs, and this was the middle one, and the other 2 caught nothing at all. So there's also a bit of wire, it looks like, on the far left side, wherever this object is, and the only reason you're seeing this is because of the intensity of the light or the energy, and that's what's lighting up that second object. You're only seeing that because of the reflection of the infrared invisible light. So I'm more inclined to think that this is part of some kind of invisible craft which you're only seeing the power source for. And I presume that it was coming this way onwards because the hit from the Geiger counter obviously was pointing the way above the trees. So I believe it was coming towards me. And in the actual photograph, this took up about a third of these lights took up about a third of the actual photograph. So I wasn't zoomed in, so it wasn't like miles away. And I've got this picture on the front of my website. It's probably one of my favourite ones, this. And it's, I think it's just an amazing photograph because you can see all these unlit sections and just wondering whether this is the power source of the craft, wherever it is. So a very, very strange one. And again, taken with no flash. So there's no flash. This was pitch darkness, and despite the apparent brightness of this, I saw nothing at all. I didn't sense anything, didn't hear anything. Just took 3 photographs straight above this tree due to a Geiger counter hit. Very, very surprised to actually capture this. So you've got to ask yourself, what is this thing doing? 100, well, just above 100-foot trees. Why was it there? What was it doing? So, and if something like this is, if you capture an object like this, what's to say there's not more objects like this? And then it begs the question, is this thing, if there's another object in the sky, could this go? Is this on a totally different reality to that? Is this not physical? Is this physical in any way at all? In its own reality, and sort of ghost-like in this reality. Could things like this actually go through a tree or through a building? This is very, very hard to know. It's a very strange one. Can you do the next one, please? So this is another example. This is part of a whole group of UFOs I captured. There's probably about 8 of them in this photograph, but these are the 4 clearest ones. And again, these were several. Well, probably I'd say about 500 foot in the sky, higher up in the sky. And I took about 4 photographs, and I think this was the 3rd photograph, and this was the only one that showed anything. So I took 3 photographs, 3 or 4 photographs, one after another, and they were nowhere to be seen in any of the photographs. And if you fast forward on again to the next one, you'll see them a bit nearer. They're all very different in shape. They look very, very plasmatic, and you can see like a luminous corona around some of them, and actually a trail. You can see on the bottom left one there's some kind of a trail which is happening within that 1/8 of a second exposure. So these things are moving pretty damn quick because they only appeared in the one photograph. So by the time I'd taken the photograph, I was like, they'd appeared and gone. And the one at the top, it looks like it's almost like dripping, plasma or something. I don't know. It's a very, very strange one. I've never caught anything like this since. This is the only example I've got of anything like this. So, you want to go to the next one? Right, so this is an example. I found that sometimes if I get multiple Geiger counter hits, what I'll do is I'll use the standard flash on the camera, because that can actually light, as I said before, it can light up the area around something, or it can actually reflect off the object and make it visible in the infrared. And this was one of those times when there's a whole load of these objects coming up, and in the whole photograph you'll see these coming up out of the ground. I took about 3 photographs, and these things were coming through the concrete out of the ground and shooting up straight in front of me in the garden. Actually shooting up, you know, they're all pretty much like this. And I've got a few other photographs where these things were like higher in the sky. There's a whole load of them. It was a totally clear night, you know, and I mean, again, I saw nothing, but I got loads of Geiger hits in every direction. I didn't know where they were coming from, so I was kind of like turning around turning the camera around on the tripod, and just taking a couple of photos one way, a couple of photos the other way, and then I was taking photos up into the sky. I took dozens of photographs, and this is probably one of the better ones I captured of that. That's taken at 1/60th of a second, but this is actually with a flash, which is a rare occasion I actually use a flash. And I found that was quite successful for some things, especially if you're in a forest and somewhere you're getting multiple hits. It's good to use a flash, because you'll often find that if things are near enough, or even near enough in the sky above you, the flash is enough to capture them, make them visible in the infrared. So go on to the next one in a minute. This is another example. Yeah, this is above one of the trees in my garden. This is about a 30-foot tree. I kept getting a Geiger counter hit, and I took loads of photographs, didn't catch anything at all, but I think this is about the 5th photograph I took, and again I've used a flash for this. They don't show that well as slides, these things. They look better, you know, on the website and stuff. So, but again, I saw nothing, sensed nothing, and caught this thing, took several photographs, and there it was in one of the photographs, looking a bit like a bauble thing you hang on a Christmas tree at Christmas. If you go to the next one, I caught another one. There you go. This was that's a TV aerial from the house, so this thing was quite near. And again, I used a flash on this. And actually lit it up. I tried taking photographs without a flash, but nothing came out apart from total darkness. But I think I took a couple with a flash, and this object revealed itself. So, you know, there's a lot of things out there, a lot of these objects, whether or not it's attracted to the TV aerial or it was attracted to perhaps the power lines near the house, I don't know. But, you know, a lot of people have captured these things near to power lines and near to lights, you know, lights. As I said before, in the streets, these things will take energy or hang around their lights. Whether or not they're taking energy from them or not, I don't know. But Trevor James Constable captured a lot of things in the desert, and they're always hanging around telephone lines and power lines. So, you know, I'm sure there is some kind of a link between these and the energy. Right, so what's the... No, you got another one? Okay, so I've continued on with my work from 2018 till now. There's a couple of this kind of like other more strange things I've captured in the sky. This was using an infrared Sony Nex5N. Because my Canon G10, what happened with that was that I was in my bedroom one night, and I thought I heard a noise in the bedroom, and I thought I saw a shimmering kind of mass, and my dog started snarling, and he was looking and snarling, and my other dog, Lucy, got on the floor, went like that, and freaking out. So I started taking photographs, and I took one photograph of what I thought was an entity in my room, and the camera just stopped working. It just went black, and it never ever worked again. It cost about £800, that camera, as well, and I sent it back, and they said that something had fried, you know, all the insides of it. And I never ever took another photo on that Canon G10. I've got this massive fear feeling and feeling of dread in my stomach, and one of my dogs was woofing at this, snarling at this entity, which I believed was in my room, which I could see kind of like a shimmering human-like thing. But the camera just couldn't take a photograph of it. So I had to then go and get another camera on top of all that, which was the Sony Nex5N. So these are Geiger counter indications. These were taken in total darkness with no flash. There's some quite interesting ones here. On the bottom line, you see the orb in the middle. I'm not sure how much you can see that, but I caught that actually in the treetops in the woodland area where I live. It's actually got eyes and a nose and a mouth. I'm not sure how clear you can see that from here, but I think there's a picture of that on my website. But I caught that in two photographs. In the first photograph, it's kind of got its head down, and you can see like the mouth at the bottom, as if it's got its head down like that. You know, the rest of them were captured quite high in the sky. And they just kind of give you an idea of some of the things you can capture. There's different white balances you can use. When you're filming in infrared or taking photographs, you can set the white balance to green grass, and that gives you that pretty much white look where you see the vegetation, the grass is white. And sometimes you'll get an odd from white to yellow colour, especially if you're filming at night, depending on the intensity of the light that you're filming or apparition you're filming. So that's why these ones are slightly yellow, because within that white colour you'll get like a yellow colour. But if you film using the automatic white balance, it leads towards red of the visible spectrum, which is why you get that pinky red sort of hue. So I tend to try and photograph or film using the white balance that I've set to green grass. So I'm going to show you a couple more now. These are some of my favourite ones, these next two. Okay, so this next one, I've got a huge Geiger counter here. It's right in the sky above my research area. I took this, it was a pitch dark night. This was taken in complete darkness, no flash at all. And I caught this object. I think the thing at the top is actually a lens flare, which is being created by that bright spot in the middle, rather than it being some kind of power source. But this object was a 20-second exposure. I took about 3 or 4 first, and they showed nothing at all. But I've got a huge Geiger count here, and this one came out as a 20-second exposure. And then I took another one straight after it, if you want to flick forward, of the same object, and it looked like that this time. And that was a 10-second exposure. And you see there's light markings on there, almost like vacuole light markings, and now they stayed where they were, but the actual size of the thing increased. And if you go back to the one before it, just to give them an example again, if you look at how straight the side bits are down there, and then you go on to the next one again now, you see how much it's grown in size and how they've gone like curved. And again you've got that intense kind of whiteness in the middle, which I think is causing the lens flare. Because a few people suggested that was some kind of a power source, but this thing was actually sitting there right above me. And the photograph is taken almost at like a 90-degree angle, looking straight up. I took several photographs, and basically these were the only 2 that showed up. Everything else was complete darkness. And these weren't zoomed in at all. These are actually the size they appeared in the photograph. So they almost took up the whole size of the photograph, and I took them. And at the same time I was using a magnetic compass as well. And the magnetic compass was going crazy. It was, there was a bit of deviation, almost like 15 degrees at one point on the magnetic compass. I was getting Geiger counter hits of 0.5, 0.6, almost like 6 times more than background radiation levels. You know, that can be quite dangerous, because if this is gamma radiation that these things are giving off, and not excited organs, I thought, these things could, make you quite ill. I mean, I had an experience happen to me about 6 months ago. I grabbed my camera, just about to go downstairs into the garden, and as I was walking downstairs, I had an infrared camera in one hand, Geiger counter in the other, both expensive bits of kit. And all of a sudden, I heard this shh, and it went straight in my head, and then it basically went straight through my body, and it buckled my knees, and I nearly fell down the stairs, and I couldn't put my hands out because I had a really expensive camera in one hand and a Geiger counter in the other. And I didn't feel right for days after that. It was almost like this thing came into me. It was like an explosion in my head. And then I had other occasions where I've got really high Geiger counter readings. All of a sudden I threw up. Sometimes I've actually just spontaneously thrown up from really high Geiger counter readings. So I was still trying to work out whether this is gamma radiation or whether it is what I believe the life energy of some of these things, which is excited in this state, which Dr. Wright called oronor. So I don't know, and it's very hard to actually, get to the bottom of this. I mean, my friend Leon Southgate, he tried to do a degree in some of these things, and they wouldn't let him. He says a lot of universities don't want to get involved in this type of work. A lot of people are uninterested. They don't want you to kind of take this work forward, it seems. But so he's done a lot. My friend Leon's done an awful lot of work. He's got a lot of papers published, and we're actually working on another paper together as to on the paranormal, which is going to feature some of the photos you've seen tonight, and going to be talking about the relationship between the paranormal and the feelings you get, the fear, and also the spontaneous Geiger counter hits, and also the deviations that you get on compasses. So we're really trying to work out, what's going on and what type of energy this is. Because if it is gamma radiation, I mean, it's not good to be around that, you know, to be around big hits of gamma radiation, especially when they last for anything up to like 3, 4, 5 minutes. And that's what happens when some of these entities, there's photographs on my website of entities. I went through a period where I was capturing entities in my greenhouse window. They seem to be using it as a portal. I captured 4 separate entities. The first one looked like a ghostly figure holding a lamp, like that, up to there. The second one looked like an extraterrestrial. Third one looked like this demonic thing with horns, and it had like, what looked like a cat on its lap with horns. And then the fourth entity had this really weird shaped head, and it had massive teeth, and there's something almost demonic about it. And I was getting very, very high Geiger counter readings then, and a massive feeling of fear, and I was feeling sick when these things manifested. And my dogs wouldn't go in the garden. My dogs were whimpering, and you know, they're Bedlington Terriers. You know, they're no pushover. I mean, we don't use them for hunting, but you know, they're hunting dogs, and they're not normally scared of anything. But so one of them wouldn't go up into my room. The other one wouldn't go anywhere near the greenhouse ever again after these things. And I'd often be walking along with the dogs, Geiger counter in hand, camera on my neck, and all of a sudden the dogs would just stop dead in their tracks, and then the Geiger counter would go off, and at the same time I'd get this massive feeling of dread. It's almost like they picked it up. I'd be walking down the road sometimes, and all of a sudden the dogs would stop. They refused to go anywhere. And then the Geiger counter would go off, and I'd take photographs, and sometimes I'd catch something, sometimes I wouldn't. So obviously animals knew. Everything happens spontaneously. And I've had, you know, instant drainings of batteries, where I've charged up 2 camcorders, gone out there, and then straight away one of the camcorders completely lost all its charge, and then the other one's lost all its charge. And then in some cases I've gone back home, you know, gone back up into my room, and battery life's gone back up again. And I took it back outside again, and it's drained again. So whether some of these things use the energy to manifest or not, I don't know. And this is what I'm suspecting about some of the lights as well, because some of the things I've captured in my garden, what happens is when I get the Geiger counter hit, the lights around the house will start flickering and sometimes go off, and then they'll all come back on again. And alarms have been triggered and things like that. So there's definitely something happening when they come into our reality. Even though they are invisible, they're affecting physical things in this reality because of the particular energy that they're made of. So, you know, and I say to a lot of people, I was saying on a show a while ago, someone said, oh, you know, what advice would you give me for going out and capturing this type of stuff? And I said, well, I think very carefully about what you do, because once you get full on into this, and especially with capturing entities and things, you know, it can really change your life. It can change the way you feel, and it can become your own, you know, your whole being, and you can leave you very, very unbalanced sometimes. You know, if you're in this total reality where that's all you're doing and you don't see any other people, you know, your whole reality becomes totally accepting that this stuff's there. You know, as I say, a lot of people don't even believe in these types of things or haven't experienced it. So some people think, well, a load of rubbish. But, you know, when you're actually experiencing this stuff and you're getting the sickness feelings and you're capturing things, you know, then you know, it can seriously affect how you feel. It really, really can. And that's, you know, and as I say again, I think there's, I found through my work that there's a definite link between the paranormal and the UFO thing. I mean, you can go out and film nuts and craft, you know, nuts and bolts craft and not have anything happen, but if you go out to the same place all again, or you go out with similar people and you're constantly willing yourself to see these things, you'll find after a while these things will appear. They will turn up, you know. They'll have to manifest at, you know, a couple of thousand feet in the sky, but they will come. You know, if you look up into the sky and you send your thoughts out to the sky, these things will pick up those thoughts and they'll come and they'll show themselves for you. But then, as I said to someone earlier, how do you then shut that off? Because you find yourself becoming sensitive. I got to the point where I kept feeling I was being watched. I'd go out with a camera, take some photographs, and I'd capture things. It's almost like I picked up that something was there. And it's, I suppose mediums and people have this kind of problem as well, where they're constantly, you know, picking up things. But, you know, I don't like it so much. It's good for capturing, you know, interesting photographs, but, you know, you still got to keep one foot in this physical real world that you're living in. So it can make it quite hard sometimes, you know. And a lot of, you know, you can spend hours and hours thinking about it, trying to rationalise it all, and going round in circles, you know. So every now and then I have to take a step back from this type of work. And, you know, I won't go to graveyards or places like that because I believe I've had like hitchhikers, and I've been to graveyards and I've had weird stuff going on. I've captured images at graveyards, and I just kind of keep away from those types of places now because I don't really want to encourage energies really to be hanging around with me, especially with the way it affects the dogs, you know. I've never seen that happen to animals before. You know, animals seem to know there's something there. So, can you do the next one for me, please? Okay, so that's my website, questioninvisibles.co.uk. You'll find a lot of the biological UFOs I've captured in the ultraviolet on there. You also find a lot of the entities. I've got loads of different sections. I've got like a evidence section. It's got about 7 or 8 different pages to it. It's got all the different things I've captured, whether they be entities or stuff at Roy's grave site. I've also got like a shadow man type being that I captured down the road from me, which was just stood there looking at me. I didn't see it, but got a Geiger counter hit, took a photograph, and there it was. It was a really warm summer night. You know, I had shorts on, but this thing was in totally black and looked like it had thick clothing on or something. It just was totally out of, you know, out of character. And it was right in the doorway of an abandoned house which was being knocked down. And I never saw it. It must have only been about 10 feet away from me, but the dog certainly sensed it, and the Geiger counter sensed it. So I just took some photographs and caught it. So yeah, and I've also got a YouTube channel which is just QFTI. But if you Google Quest for the Invisibles Nik Hayes or something, you'll find all of this stuff. I've done several talks where I've shows on the internet where I've shown a lot of other photographs and things that I've not necessarily shown tonight. So there you go. So that's what I've been up to for like the last 12 years, and it's something I'm still kind of continuing now. It's just how far do you take it? That's the thing, isn't it? So, and I'm pretty much a recluse. I do all this myself. I'm not really involved with anybody else taking photos, and I don't drive. So therefore, I'm doing most of my research from my research area, which is an acre of land, which is my garden, and then it's another couple of acres of land around it. So that's where I do most of my work. Very rarely I go anywhere else to take photographs. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's just a few of the things I've captured. I know it's not the best quality when they're projected like this, but if you have a look at the website, you'll see much clearer versions of what I've shown you tonight. So that's questioninvisibles.co.uk if you want to have a look at that.
Yeah, they do come up a bit better on the laptop than they do on the projector.
Yeah, they look pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I think my website's much better viewed on a laptop than it is on a phone, but it is set up to be viewed on a phone, but I think it's much better on the laptop. But you'll see much clearer things. Yeah. I mean, I've also caught light trails in the sky. I've also caught like invisible mists. I took one photograph of a luminous invisible mist that seemed to be like fluidic and moving through a forest, and you could almost see it dripping off the leaves of the trees. And the illumination from it illuminated everything, and I saw nothing at all. I was in pitch darkness. Most surprised, I got a hit of about 0.3 microsieverts per hour, which is quite a high hit at ground level. Took photographs, caught nothing at all apart from one photograph which showed this weird mist moving, and that's on the website as well. There's also quite a few other images that I've captured, UFO type images in my book Quest for the Invisibles, and I've got a few copies of my book with me if anyone's interested. I brought a few up with me today, so there's a few photographs in there that I haven't shown you tonight, which don't show that well as a presentation. So right, I'm going to take a few questions if anyone's got any questions.
Turn the lights on again, huh? Light on for that?
You can do, yeah. But I mean, ask me anything you want to know. I mean, I'll answer any questions you want.
Yeah, it's worth looking at Nick's website because they're so much better on the laptop than they are on the screen. So
there's a strange world out there. There's a lot out there that we can't see. I mean, there's a lot out there that you can see, but there's an awful lot in the invisible.
Somebody got any questions for that?
Yeah, any questions? Anything you want to ask me?
You obviously think these are earthly bound figures, yes?
What's that? The entities? Well, most of them have originated from, well, a lot of the stuff came from my cat's grave site. No, what happened was when I buried my cat, I hand painted like a headstone for him, and I actually got a bronze. I was in a second-hand shop and I found this really nice bronze model of Bast, the Egyptian cat goddess Bast, and it was painted up and it was bronze, about that big. So I put that on the gravestone, next to the gravestone, and I basically said a load of prayers to my cat Roy. And that's when all the weird stuff started kicking off, you know. It got so bad in my house that I had to take all the mirrors out of my house because my dogs were barking at the mirror one night, and I looked in the mirror and I thought I saw a shadow person in the mirror, and it freaked me out that much, and dogs wouldn't go there, so I got rid of all my mirrors. I won't have a mirror in my house now. I got rid of every mirror, I painted them black and buried them face down in the ground.
The images you've taken now, you think they're earthly bound rather than extraterrestrial, yes?
Yeah, or interdimensional even. I think there's a lot of things coming from parallel realities. I think there's many parallel realities existing around us. Some things can step out from and into this reality and go back again.
Okay.
Which is worrying, because you don't know if they take you back there with them, you know, some of these things people see. You know...
So in your experience, what do you actually think they are, in your opinion?
I think a lot of them are just part of this reality. I think they're invisible. Well, they're not actually part of this physical reality, but I just think they're natural to Earth. I think a lot of things that are in the sky, I think they're just sky creatures that seem to be living in a plasmoidal state. They're in the invisible, and they do come into this physical reality. But I think they spend most of their time in the invisible, to be quite honest with you. But as for like the shadow man thing, I captured this kind of dark entity. I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of earthbound things that are here. But I mean, that thing with the lights, that thing there. I mean, that's definitely, it doesn't look that good on there. But when you have a good look at the photographs, you'll see there's a much bigger structure going to the left and the right that you can just about see that this seems to be part of.
You can see the other lights coming down in the black bits. Where there's black bits, you can see
Yeah.
the other
So
ones, but fainter.
that's definitely some kind of a huge craft, I think, which is only about 100 foot off the ground, which is just above the 100-foot tree. So yeah, I believe these things, you know, they are, I don't know, maybe they're interdimensional, I don't know. I mean, maybe that kind of thing just goes around in the invisible all the time. I mean, I only caught it because the energy that it's given off was captured there with the infrared camera. Otherwise, it's totally invisible and totally silent. I wouldn't have known it was there, apart from the Geiger counter telling me it was there. So,
How does that Geiger counter work? Does it pick up from a long distance or a short distance?
yeah, it's got two Geiger tubes, the one I've got. Basically, wherever you aim the Geiger counter, it's safe to say that you take photos in that direction. But I've captured things which seem 500 feet or even higher in the sky, and I've captured them from the Geiger counter.
And do those figures drop after a short time, or...?
Yeah, sometimes it's just a quick hit, dead quick, and it's gone in a fraction of a second, especially with things passing overhead. But with the entity things, the more paranormal things, what you'll get a huge hit, and it will sit there for ages, then it will gradually peter off. But sometimes it will be there for 3 or 4 minutes. So it's more the stuff I capture at ground level, the more paranormal stuff. It seems to read for much longer, but whereas the things that are going over in the sky, they seem to just be there 1 second, and it goes for a fraction of a second, you know, it just literally, and then it's gone. So it's only just having a chance to measure it, you know, and then it's gone again. So
what is its range of measurement? I mean, it's obviously measuring to your grave, but it's also measuring hundreds of feet up in the air,
yeah, it might be ciphers per hour. Yeah, I mean 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times the normal background radiation levels, and that's high, you know. And I say I've experienced sickness and things straight away when things have manifested. I've actually thrown up, projectile vomited, felt fine, you know, and then all of a sudden I've got this feeling of dread, and I've ended up just having to put the equipment down, ended up heaving up. And not feeling well at all, getting headaches, especially when I got that sort of sound in my head. It went right to my head, and it almost sounded like it exploded, and my knees buckled. I nearly fell down the stairs. I've had a few instances where I've fell down the stairs, slipped down the stairs. You know, it gets a bit much when stuff like that happens, to be quite honest with you. So any other questions?
You mentioned about the heat and the different heats, because when we were on a skywalk a couple of weeks ago, we noticed a different temperature where we were.
Oh yeah.
And what we walked into, and we picked it up, didn't we?
Yeah.
They were warm spots rather than cold spots.
What is, yeah, but he's got a different style.
Well, I think they drain the energy to manifest sometimes. I mean, I've had things where I've been sitting on my settee and all of a sudden I felt an icy cold thing next to me. It's like a icy cold spot in the room. And I have had like Geiger counter hits, because sometimes I sit there with a Geiger counter next to me. I try not to do it in my own room because I'm trying to keep it away, you know, in the garden. But I've left the Geiger counter on a few times by mistake, and it's gone off at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I put it to vibrate. I've left it on the fruit bowl the other day, and of course it went off at 3 in the morning and went zzz. It scared me to death. I jumped out of bed. I was like, bloody hell, you know. And the room went really cold. Yeah, I think they manifest into this reality, and they either take the energy or the heat to manifest. Unless they're made of some cold matter that's just so cold and freezing, I don't know. I really do.
I was mistaken, I thought you said earlier that you could feel the heat increase.
Oh, you can sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you can feel the heat increase, yeah. The GRCU picked up increases in heat and decreases in heat. Yeah. There's differentials in heat, definitely.
I was just wondering why that was, thermals or...
I don't know, it might be because of the particular energy they're made of. I don't know, because a lot of these things you capture them in the infrared, because infrared radiation is basically heat. So you're only seeing them through the infrared camera because you're picking up heat or ultraviolet radiation.
Oh, that makes sense then.
So you're only seeing them because they are heat, basically. Yeah. So, yeah, any more questions?
No, Nick, can I show you? Yeah, well, I showed the photo. You know, I was at a wedding 11 years ago. I've done photography 60 years.
Yeah.
Doing a wedding about 11 years ago. My friend called in, he said, can you do a wedding for my daughter? So I said, yeah, he's only about 100 yards from us. And so he was in, I don't know if he knows the Glen Clinic Hotel. Anybody?
Yeah.
So that was a wedding held there. And so I said, yeah, no problem. I said, when is it? He said, next year. So he came back a few days after. He said, could you do it next week?
Right.
I said, I'm okay, but what's the problem? He said, the wife has got not long to live. He had cancer, and she had about, she said, 3 weeks to live. So he said, can you do it next week? So I took my acid blood with the film in, with negatives, 2¼ square.
Yeah.
And I had a brand new Panasonic digital with an SD card, you know, so I went to the Clinic, and but first of all, 3 days before the wedding, she was pretty bad, the wife, and he said, could you hypnotize her? Could you come down on the Wednesday and hypnotize the wife? I've done hypnosis from the 60s, you know, I've done all the clubs as well. And I did hypnotherapy as well for people. I didn't charge, I just said to her, look, do you want me to come down to your house and hypnotize the wife? He said, yeah, come down. So no, on the Wednesday before the wedding, she looked pretty bad. I went down and spent an hour, hypnotized her, told her, on Saturday you look radiant. You go to the wedding, nobody will tell, only the ones who know we've got 3 weeks to live.
Yeah.
So I went to the wedding, took as a kind of church door, I'll show it in a sec, as a church door, which is a fake church door, you know, it's not a proper, and I took about Hasselblad 3 rolls of 12 for the album,
Right.
but I always do a backup, I don't risk anything in weddings, you know. So I took another 36, well I took about more than 36, but
Right.
the digital I took about 90 odd, you know, so
Right.
they came back, and if you've seen his wife, when I went over there on a Wednesday, you think, bloody hell, she's gonna, looks terrible. I got a photo of her after I hypnotized her, but this thing appeared then on the sepia photo I took.
Right.
And I'll show it to you. It looks a bit similar to the one I showed you in the beginning, you know. I'll come and show it.
Yeah, come on, have a look.
I'll never forget it. It happened 11 years ago. I've enlarged it a bit as well. That appeared.
This?
Yeah. Never ever, I've taken weddings for years. It never happened before. 60 years of photography. I've blown that up a bit.
And that was taken on film? That was a film one, was it?
Yeah, no, that's the digital.
That's the digital one?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was brand new. I hadn't even, you know, it was only, I took a few photos when I had it back. But if you look at his wife, if you had seen her on the Wednesday, she looked great in the wedding. That's her in the hotel. And first of all, I took a black and white with a digital. I done the wedding all in the Hasselblad. 3 rolls. I done 36 shots, 12 on each. I took 3 rolls, 12 exposures, and blew them up to 8x8. And she collected. I didn't know about it till they collected the wedding, collected the photos of the daughter. I wasn't in. The wife gave them to him.
It's pretty amazing, though.
Yeah, and what the thing was, that's not all. She did die in 3 weeks.
Right.
Goes to the funeral. My friend, I know him from that day. We both live in 2 doors from me. I moved up the Kimberley, further up the Kimberley. And I went, after I took that, I didn't know it happened. So I went to the funeral. I put my arm around him. When you walked through, I put my arm around, I said, sorry, Rob. He said, I want to see you after something's happened. I'm going, I didn't know about it, but what happened was, they said before I done the photos, I had the photos with me to go home, but I just put my arm on he said, look, he said, something's happened, that one of your photos, after I gave him the photos, he said, not the Hasselblad ones, he said on the 35mm digital. Yeah. I don't know if you know, I'm in Kimberley. If you want to go on the M4, you've got to go like Nice.
Yeah, I don't know this area.
I wouldn't know it. So anyway, he didn't go to the M4, to the crematorium in Port Albert. He went the other way, up where Richard Burton was born. Right. Ponte de Ven, it's called, under the viaduct, and he turned right that way. And as they were going up there, after the funeral, he looked on the cliff face. They all got out of the car, the driver as well, and he said, look at that, a big cross carved on the rocks. Right. And so when I put my arm around him that day in the funeral, he said, I'm going back up on my own. Right. He went back up in his own, huge cross had gone.
Oh right.
But then, we didn't know about this till I did the photos, give them to him, and I did this before I took the wedding itself, 35mm and Hasselblad, but there's the first one I took, and then the sepia one, that appeared, it's something appeared there.
Yeah, it's definitely something.
Oh, it's not, it's got a tail, it's got, and it looks as if it's praying. Yeah. And I'll get it now. And the wife, my friend's wife, was this side. She wasn't in the photo there.
No one could see anything.
No, she was by her, out the photo, but I've done this place hundreds of times, things like that, and
it's
never ever happened before.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it?
And it's on the digital, and I blew it up there, look.
Yeah, I can
but
see,
if you look, it looks as if it's praying.
Looks like angelic.
Hands together, tail on the back. But it's never happened in my life. I've done shots of the space station, I had good shots of those, but this appeared.
Yeah, nothing surprises me anymore, to be honest.
No, my friend phoned me up and he said, what the hell is this on one of the photos when I came back? And I said, what's wrong? I looked on I didn't have it, I give him the lot, I give him the backup. I always do a backup I've done risk weddings. Hasselblad, done the wedding with, and I had the backup then, another camera, give him. I didn't know about it until he...
No, that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
But that's, when I looked at the photos then with his wife, and she was, and the funny thing was, she was given the Virgin Mary, there's 3 doves. There's 3 doves there. My friend said she was given this before she died by a friend. You know, and there's 1 dove there, 1 dove there, 1 dove there, and she was like she was praying to that. Right. I don't know if that did any good. I don't know if that's the type of dove that appeared, you know.
Yeah, I mean, nothing surprises me.
I don't know.
Strange stuff, to be honest
It's
with you.
never happened, you know, all the times I've been in Kingston Hotel, never happened before.
That's a strange one, yeah.
It's
yeah.
weird, you know.
Right, I think.
Okay, thanks David.
Yeah,
Was
okay,
it-
man.
Right, thanks everybody for
I
listening.
think
And
there's one more photograph,
Is it?
one more question, right? I think you want to... Yeah.
You said while you were speaking about some of the organic forms
yeah.
that they seem to be telepathic.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so. Some of them.
So they've communicated with you, presumably.
Well, I've called them in. I've asked them to come, and they've come.
Right.
I've not had like. I felt they were there. I've suddenly felt I'm being watched, and I've gone outside. I've never had them saying, "Oh, I'm here." I've never had like direct communication. I mean, I don't want that, to be honest with you. Trevor James Constable had that. He lost control of his body for a while. I mean, he woke up in the middle of the night and someone took over his body and ended up walking down the road in the early hours of the morning, and he had no control over his body. So he had to try to kind of undo what he'd done. So I've always been very wary of that. But no, you can communicate. If you look up to the sky and you ask these things to come, ask if there's any sky creatures up there, and you do it with sincerity, and these things will appear, sometimes within 10 minutes. But if you keep doing it, you'll find that they'll start coming out whenever you're outside. But I think it's best to avoid any type of communication, because I think ultimately we're all consciousness is one anyway.
Yes, it is.
And I believe that these things can very easily interact with you. But you don't want to get to the point where you've got interactions from them that you can't stop.
Right.
Because you can't really go to the doctor and say, "Hey doc,"
No, you can't. No, that's true. Yes.
you end up in some institution or something.
The doctor's usually stoned on drugs anyway, so...
Yeah. Even though you've got photographic proof of stuff, you still might not
Yes.
think you're that sane or something.
Thank you.
So, all right.
Right, yeah, it's coming on to 11 o'clock. I think we better go on.
This
We
is
could go for
amazing,
ages, could we?
isn't it?
Wednesday night.
Yeah, can you put your hands together for Nik Hayes?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Nick, I think definitely deserves a medal for his conviction and his patience and all the hard work he's put into it. And it's on